Verity Haverford turned the iron key in the account room lock before the Duke of Grimsby could step across the threshold. Behind her, a metal basin caught rain from the roof Henrietta Pembroke had once said would send any sensible widow running. Verity put the key in her pocket. "They may call this place a punishment. I still intend to make it a home." Fitzwilliam's smile lost a little of its mischief. "Then tell me which door I am actually invited to open." "The kitchen door, Your Grace. After that, the yard. This one remains shut." A roofer's hammer rang outside. The first cottage had 4 weeks to become dry enough for a tenant. Without its rent, Verity could not carry the next repairs. With one visible failure, Henrietta could press the trustees to call the whole arrangement unsound. Fitzwilliam glanced toward the leaking ceiling. "What is the first expense you cannot master, Slate? And men who prefer replacing sound pieces because sorting them is slower. I could buy the slate." "No." "Then Henrietta calls the roof charity and the property incapable of supporting itself." He considered that without arguing. "Then use my acquaintances. I know quarry owners, merchants, and several men who dislike disappointing me. Disappointing a duke is not a payment method. No, but it often earns a second conversation." That was an offer Verity could use. "You may bring men to the table and keep them there. You will promise no sum, no lease, and no work until I approve it. A narrow kingdom. It is the one I am offering. And if a man refuses my charm, you may suffer privately." He laughed, then stepped away from the account room door. "Show me the roof." In the yard, 3 stacks of old slate waited beneath canvas. Mr. Miller the merchant bowed to Fitzwilliam and scarcely bent his head to Verity. "I was told there might be a proper commission." "There is," Verity said, opening her book on the stone wall. "If your slate survives being touched." The last delivery broke too easily. 3p the square sound pieces only. 3 3/4. "Then Kendall may have my money." Miller looked to the Duke. Fitzwilliam studied the clouds. "Mrs. Haverford has explained that I am decorative until spoken to." Miller looked back at her. 3.5. 3.25. Thursday before noon. He grumbled, but he nodded. Verity drew one line beneath the figure. The first costly question had been answered without Fitzwilliam spending a farthing or speaking over her. Then the roofer called down that the entire western pitch ought to be stripped because sorting the old slate would take too long. Verity shut the book and went to the ladder. "Mrs. Haverford." She put one foot on the second rung and looked back. Fitzwilliam did not tell her to come down. He merely held out her work gloves, which she had left beside the slate stacks. "You will want these if you intend to contradict a roofer on his own scaffolding." She took them. "You learn quickly. I am highly trainable when threatened with figures." From the roof edge, Verity checked the old slates one by one. Some split under the light pressure of her thumb, others rang clear when tapped. The roofer wanted speed. Verity wanted a house that could pay for its own survival. She ordered the sound pieces kept for the eastern side, and new slate used only where the weather struck hardest. Below, Miller's driver began complaining that the arrangement would delay his return road. Fitzwilliam leaned against the wall and somehow turned the complaint into an argument about whether Miller's bays could outrun a mare belonging to Lord Wetherby. By the time Verity descended, the driver was grinning and had agreed to wait while the usable slate was counted. By dusk, the usable slate had been counted, and the western order reduced. The roof was not saved. Not yet. But it was the first day Fitzwilliam's presence had made Brackenmere easier without making it less hers. On Sunday, Mrs. Constance Cavendish came to inspect the first cottage. She was a widow of nearly 60 with a walnut cane, a sensible bonnet, and no patience for pretty lies. Verity liked her before they reached the hearth. "The west roof is new," Verity said. "The eastern side is repaired with sound old slate. I expect 3 years before I must look at it again. The kitchen boards are uneven but dry. The chimney was swept yesterday, and I will not ask you to sign until you have seen it draw." Constance tapped her cane against the flagged floor. "I was told the place was dissolving, only in selected corners." Fitzwilliam, standing well behind them in the doorway, coughed into his fist. Constance turned. "And what does a duke do in a cottage with selected corners? Obeys Mrs. Haverford chiefly." Verity gave him a look. "Occasionally." The widow's mouth twitched. She asked for a narrow shelf beside the pantry, and a patch of ground for thyme, feverfew, and rosemary. Verity measured the shelf with her eye, calculated the timber left from the roof battens, and agreed to both. Constance did not ask Fitzwilliam a single question about the lease. He did not answer one. By the time the hearth drew cleanly, Constance held out her hand. "I will take it." Verity had expected satisfaction. Instead, for one unguarded second, she could only hear the new fire settling in the grate. The room no longer sounded empty. Outside, Fitzwilliam waited while Constance's gig was brought round. "You did not sell her a view of the hills," he said. "She cannot sleep under a view." "No. But she can sleep under your roof. Her roof." The words struck deeper than praise should have done. "You kept Miller in the yard," she said, "and you kept the rain out. I know which achievement I should boast of." He had begun calling twice each week after that, and more remarkable, he arrived when he said he would. He brought no flowers, he brought men. A timber merchant came on a Wednesday and tried to discuss oak with Fitzwilliam until the Duke pointed to Verity and said, "She knows how much wall is missing. I merely know who dislikes being kept waiting." A glazier came Friday, 5 minutes early. Verity made both men wait while she checked that the roofer had reset a ladder on firm ground. "I had imagined rank might defeat punctuality," Fitzwilliam said. "Not gravity." The glazier laughed so hard he accepted her second price. By the second week of October, Brackenmere had ceased to resemble a punishment and begun to resemble a place under siege by useful people. Timber leaned beneath the eaves. Lime dried under canvas. Constance's pantry shelf waited against the kitchen wall. Every day produced a new inconvenience. Every evening Verity crossed one line from a list. Then the rain came hard enough to turn the yard silver. The cart from Keswick carrying the large tarpaulin had not arrived. The second cottage stood with part of its roof open and fresh plaster exposed beneath. "If that wall is soaked through, we lose weeks," Verity called. The foreman shouted that he could spare 2 men to strip canvas from the first cottage. "No. Mrs. Cavendish moves in 3 days. We do not make one house unsafe to save another." A horse came through the gate at a careful trot. Fitzwilliam dismounted before the groom could reach him. He took in the bare roof, the men fighting the wind, and Verity holding a rope that kept whipping against her sleeve. "There is a wagon under the ash trees," she shouted. "It has spare sailcloth." "I saw it." He crossed the yard to the driver. Verity could not hear more than fragments through the rain, but she saw the important part. No raised voice, no threat of rank, no purse opened. Fitzwilliam said something that made the driver glance toward a stack of timber, then toward his own team. A minute later, both men were hauling a folded sheet of heavy canvas from beneath the wagon seat. "Borrowed," Fitzwilliam called. At the terrible price of admiring his horses. "I hope you were convincing. I was magnificent." They dragged the canvas across the yard. The wind caught it like a sail. Verity seized one corner. The foreman took another. Fitzwilliam caught the rope as it snapped out of her hand. "West first," she ordered. "Not the chimney. The plaster wall." He obeyed. Rain ran from his hair into his collar. Mud blackened the knees of his buckskins. His fine gloves were ruined within minutes. None of it made him less useful. When at last the cloth was tied and weighted, they stumbled into the lodge kitchen with the others. Verity pushed wet hair from her cheek, turned, and saw the Duke of Grimsby staring mournfully at one glove whose pale leather had become the color of ditch water. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. He looked offended. "Madam, a loyal servant has died in your cause. It is a glove. My valet will regard the distinction as sentimental." Her laughter came again, warmer this time. He grinned and set the ruined pair beside the hearth. They ate bread, cheese, and apples at the scarred table because no one had strength to arrange anything better. Fitzwilliam sat opposite her rather than at the head. When the foreman came in to report that the cloth was holding, he addressed Verity first. Only after the men returned to the yard did she notice Fitzwilliam watching the empty plate before him. "What I was wondering whether you ever eat a meal before it becomes cold. Occasionally in July." An ambitious woman. She should have dismissed the warmth gathering beneath her ribs as fatigue. Instead, she allowed herself the smaller truth she liked him best when he forgot to be impressive. 2 weeks later, the repair accounts turned against her. Extra brick for the second chimney had consumed nearly all the savings she had made on slate. 3 men expected payment within days of one another. A decorative plaster border in the sitting room, which had seemed modest in September, now looked like an insult written in lime. Verity sat in the kitchen after dark with one candle crossing out figures and putting them back again. Fitzwilliam stopped at the threshold. "Kitchen?" he asked. She looked at him. Since the first morning he had begun doing that at every interior door. "Kitchen." He entered and sat across from her. "You have moved those 3 payments twice," he said. "I am considering moving them a 3rd time. Does the timber merchant require his whole account on the 30th? He completed the work." "That was not my question." She frowned. Fitzwilliam rested one finger beside the date without touching the ledger itself. "I knows my cousin for a pair of carriage horses and wishes very much not to be reminded of it at Christmas. If I ask him to allow you until January for half his account, he will think himself fortunate. Interest none if I am sufficiently charming. Then for once I encourage excess." He smiled. Verity recalculated. The change did not solve everything, but it made the figures breathe. "The plaster border goes," she said. From the chair nearest the hearth, Constance Cavendish looked up from her mending. She had moved into the first cottage 3 days earlier and had come to complain that the kitchen bench was crooked. "The bench stays," Constance said. "It leans. It fits my bad knee. It is badly made. It is comfortable." Fitzwilliam looked from one woman to the other. "I have learned enough to remain silent." "You are improving," Verity told him. Constance pointed her needle at the Duke. "Do not become smug. You still know less about benches than either of us." The crooked bench stayed. Verity had spent weeks making every cost defensible against Henrietta. Constance cared only that the bench suited her knee. The lesson was irritatingly simple. A home was not an argument made of stone. It was where people acquired preferences. By the 6th week, the second cottage needed its final hearth test. On the same afternoon, a glass merchant was due to settle the price of new panes. Verity stood in the corridor with her account book under one arm and the iron key in her palm. She could postpone one task. That was what she would once have done: postpone it, absorb the delay, then spend the evening correcting the next 3 consequences herself. Fitzwilliam waited without reaching for the key. "The glazier will want to see the last account," she said. "You may use the account room from noon until 2. Window glass only. No promises beyond 7 pence a pane. No one else enters. Window glass. 7 pence. No one else. And the door is locked when you finish." "Yes, Mrs. Haverford." She placed the key in his hand. His fingers closed around it without brushing hers. The restraint felt more intimate than an accidental touch. Verity left for the second cottage. The mason had indeed tried to hurry the hearth test. She kept him there until the smoke drew cleanly, then checked the new flashing at the chimney base. By the time she crossed back through the wet yard, it was 2:15. She expected to find Fitzwilliam in the kitchen with a price and an apology for running late. Instead, there was a carriage beside the stable. Not his. Verity slowed. Voices came from the account room. Her first thought was absurdly practical. He had left the door open. Her second was colder. She walked down the corridor and pushed it wider. Fitzwilliam sat on the visitor's side of her desk. Henrietta Pembroke occupied the chair opposite him, immaculate in plum-coloured wool despite the mud outside. Mr. Sterling, the senior trustee, stood near the window with a glass of wine in his hand. On Verity's desk lay the iron key. Fitzwilliam had not taken money. He had not altered a figure. He had done something more familiar and therefore more dangerous. He had taken a permission meant for one purpose and widened it because he believed the result would justify him. Henrietta's eyes brightened when she saw Verity. Fitzwilliam rose. "Verity, Mrs. Haverford," she said. The room went still. Mr. Sterling set down his wine too quickly. "There appears to have been some misunderstanding." "There has." Verity stepped aside from the doorway. "The meeting is over." Henrietta did not hurry. His Grace was merely concerned about the future of the cottages. His Grace may be concerned from the corridor. Henrietta's smile was almost invisible. She had found the fracture and intended to enjoy it. Fitzwilliam's face changed. The brightness he wore in difficult rooms vanished. "Mrs. Pembroke," he said plain and cool, "I asked you here." Mrs. Haverford did not. "You and Mr. Sterling will leave." That cost him something. Verity saw it in Henrietta's sharp look. His elegant little performance had just become an admission made in front of the people he had meant to outmaneuver. When the carriage finally rolled away, Verity returned to the account room. Fitzwilliam remained outside it. She picked up the key. "The glazier told me Sterling was riding to Henrietta, and that his nephew had been promised a place in her household. I sent a groom to turn them here. I thought Sterling would show which way he meant to vote." "And did he?" "Yes." "Then you obtained what you wanted." His mouth tightened. "You also used my room after the purpose I gave you had ended. You brought Henrietta into it. You brought a trustee into it. You decided that because your plan was clever, my permission could stretch around it. I did, no joke, no defense." Verity turned the key in the lock. The click was not loud, yet it seemed to settle the whole corridor. Fitzwilliam took one step back from the door. "I used access you lent me for one task to arrange another," he said. "I had no right to do it. Sterling's fear does not alter that." The anger in her chest did not soften simply because he had named it correctly. Yet it checked just for a breath. She had expected the usual alteration of the argument that permission had been close enough, that the result had been useful, that she ought not object after the danger was reduced. Her marriage had taught her how quickly a man could turn his own convenience into a reason she was unreasonable. Fitzwilliam did none of it. He stood outside the room he had entered wrongly and left the meaning of her refusal untouched. He had understood the injury, not merely the rule. That did not earn forgiveness. But Verity saw him more clearly for it. "No," she said. "What do you require of me?" "Require of me nothing tonight." He inclined his head. Then he did the one thing she had not expected. He left. For 4 days, Fitzwilliam did not cross Brackenmere's threshold. He did not send flowers. He did not send a page of polished remorse. On Friday morning, Verity found a folded sheet beneath a stone on the kitchen step. It contained 3 timber quotes, 2 dates for lime delivery, and the answer to a question she had written on a work list before the quarrel. Nothing more. The next day there was another sheet, the cost of cartage from Kendal, with the cheaper road marked in the margin. On Sunday she saw him in the far yard, speaking to the roofer. He removed his hat when he noticed her, but did not approach the house. Constance beside Verity with her cane followed her gaze. "His Grace looks miserable." "He will recover. Most dukes do." Verity almost smiled. What mattered was not that Fitzwilliam looked sorry. Miller had delivered the lime account was corrected, and no merchant treated the Duke's presence as authority over her purse. His apology had become work rather than display. A week later, winter prices forced a harder admission from Verity. She sat at the kitchen table with the slate account until the figures left. Only one useful fact. Harrison of Keswick must lower his price by half a penny, or the third cottage would wait for spring. Her first impulse was to ride there herself. Instead, she circled his name when Fitzwilliam appeared at the open kitchen door. Harrison, 3.5 pence. No trustee, no promise in my name. He took the paper. Understood. Then he went. Verity did not follow, send a boy, or recalculate the work merely to feel that her hands were on every part of it. She finished the mason's account, approved Constance's shelf, and left Harrison's name alone. He returned after dark and laid the merchant's quote on the kitchen table, then stepped back from it. 3.5. I promised him an introduction to my estate manager regarding a timber contract in spring. Nothing of yours. Verity checked the figure once. Once was enough. She closed the ledger. There is stew by the hearth. His shoulders eased. Is that payment, numbered payment, makes arithmetic simpler than this? He came in. The meal was ordinary, which made it more dangerous to her caution than the rain had been. Fitzwilliam complained that Harrison had made him drink weak ale. Verity called it the natural punishment for vanity. He asked whether Constance's bench still offended her. Daily. He laughed. Trust, she discovered, could return without spectacle. A man stopped at the right door, and she did not check his work twice. 2 days later, the courier came. The notice bore the trustee's seal and called for a meeting in 7 days. Henrietta had persuaded Mr. Sterling to press for the sale of the first and second cottages on the ground that the repairs were consuming more of the settled property than their rents could justify. Verity read it once in the yard. Then again. The first cottage was occupied. The second was nearly ready. Selling either now would turn months of careful expense into Henrietta's argument that Verity could begin work, but could not sustain it. Fitzwilliam arrived within the hour because Miller, having seen the courier, had sent word to him. He read the notice and whistled softly. I have a dreadful idea, he said. Verity looked up. How dreadful dinner? 8 courses. Sterling at my right hand. His nephew placed beside a woman who would make the young man confess every ambition he has ever had. By pudding I could make Sterling wish he had never heard Mrs. Pembroke's name. Absolutely not. I feared you would say that. You may not turn my house into another stage. I did not say your house. You were thinking it. He had the grace to look amused and ashamed at once. Partly. Verity folded the notice against her repair board. If you expose Sterling, the other trustees will close ranks against being managed by you. Henrietta will say, I have hidden behind your title because my figures cannot stand. Can they stand? Yes. Then what do you require? There it was again. Not what could he seize. What did she require? The 2 trustees who are not pledged to Henrietta. Meet them in town. Explain nothing about my accounts. Ask only whether they will hear the full plan here before they vote. And if they ask what I think, tell them you think selling a sound cottage because repairs cost money is an expensive form of panic. His smile returned. That sentence is almost charming. It is yours if you use it accurately. I shall polish it only slightly, he went. Verity went inside and did not enter the account room until she had assigned the yard first. Under strain, she could feel the old hunger to put her hands on every task. The second cottage still needed a final chimney drawer. The trustees' figures had to be copied. Miller wanted an answer about the third roof. Constance had discovered a loose latch. Verity put on her cloak while still holding a wet pen. Then stopped. Constance was at the kitchen table sorting dried rosemary into a jar. Will you oversee the chimney test? Verity asked. The mason is not to leave until the smoke draws cleanly for 10 minutes. Constance looked delighted. May I be unpleasant? I am relying upon it. Verity sat back down. The pen trembled once between her fingers. Then it steadied. She finished the trustee's plan before sunset. Fitzwilliam returned from town after dark. He did not come farther than the kitchen. "One will attend," he said. "The other refuses to promise a vote, which is perhaps the first sensible thing any trustee has done this week. He will attend as well." "Did you offer them dinner tea?" "Dangerously extravagant. 2 biscuits each." I nearly lost control. She smiled despite the knot beneath her ribs. The next morning, Brackenmere's drawing room held Henrietta, the trustees, and Verity. There was enough cold civility in the air to frost the windows. Fitzwilliam sat near the side wall rather than beside Verity. That placement had been his choice. Weeks earlier, she would not have believed he knew how to occupy the edge of a room. Henrietta opened. "The settlement cannot have intended that good money be poured indefinitely into 3 cottages of doubtful value." "No one proposes indefinitely," Verity said. She set out the first page of her figures. Henrietta's fan tapped once against her wrist. Verity kept her eyes on the trustees. "Mrs. Cavendish's rent now covers the ordinary upkeep of the first cottage. The second requires only the final window account before letting. The third will be completed in stages. The reserve remains sufficient if the south sitting-room plaster and the garden wall are postponed." Mr. Sterling gave a short laugh. "A reserve on paper. It is in the estate account. And winter charges entered here. And Harrison 3.5 pence. That silenced him for half a breath. Henrietta recovered first. "Terms obtained because His Grace has attached himself to this absurd experiment." Verity had expected the thrust. Before Fitzwilliam could speak, she answered, "His Grace introduced men I might not easily have reached. He did not set the prices I accepted, sign a lease, pay a debt, or choose a repair. If he ceased calling tomorrow, the rents and obligations on these pages would remain." The room became very quiet. That was the point Verity most needed them to understand. Not that a duke approved of her, that Brackenmere could stand when he left. One of the undecided trustees leaned forward. "And if the cottages are sold now, the first lease must be dealt with, the second repair account must be settled at once, and the favourable staged payments I have arranged may be lost." His gaze shifted to Fitzwilliam. Only then did the Duke speak. "I asked Miller and Harrison that very question yesterday. Both are content to continue on their present terms while Mrs. Haverford directs the work. Neither will promise the same indulgence to a purchaser conducting a hurried sale." Mr. Sterling flushed. "Are we to be threatened by tradesmen?" "Not at all," Fitzwilliam said pleasantly. "You are being offered the rare privilege of knowing what they intend before you make them angry." One trustee hid a smile. Henrietta's fan snapped shut. She tried another route, speaking of uncertainty in Providence and the embarrassment of leaving family property in the hands of a young widow who had already spent heavily. Verity let her finish. Then Verity removed one item from her own plan. "The garden wall will wait until summer," she said. "I will not ask the settlement to carry work that the cottages do not yet require. With that change, the rents and reserve meet the coming obligations." The undecided trustee nearest the fire exhaled and looked toward his colleague. "I see no cause for sale." The other nodded slowly. "Nor I, provided the accounts are reviewed at the end of the quarter." "By the trustees," Verity said, "with notice to me, and in this room only when I am present." Mr. Sterling's eyes flickered toward Fitzwilliam. Verity did not look at him. One trustee agreed, then the other. The sale proposal was finished. There was no applause, no grand declaration, only chairs moving, papers being gathered, and Henrietta standing so abruptly that her skirt brushed the table. At the door she paused beside Verity. "You imagine this makes the place yours?" Verity closed the ledger. The covers met with a solid thud. Then she met Henrietta's gaze. "No. The settlement already gave me the life interest. Today merely established that neglect will not take it back." Henrietta left. Mr. Sterling followed. The remaining trustees departed more slowly, discussing the quarter review and the state of the road. Fitzwilliam saw them to the outer door. Verity carried her ledger to the account room, put it inside, and locked the door. When she returned to the kitchen, the kettle had begun to mutter over the fire. Fitzwilliam's footsteps came down the corridor. They stopped at the threshold. The practical reason for him to remain had ended. That fact opened a hollow place in her chest she disliked at once. He rested one hand against the door frame, not crossing it. "Should I go?" "Verity." He had used her name before. This time it did not sound like something taken in the warmth of a moment. It sounded offered back to her. She looked at the mud dried on his boots, the familiar line of his dark coat, the man who could have turned the morning into a display and had instead sat against the wall until his part was required. "The property work is finished for today," she said. "I feared as much. You may stay for supper." His expression changed. "And you may return on Sunday at 4. On what business, none." He was silent for perhaps the first time since she had known him. Verity lifted the kettle. "Do not make me repeat myself, your grace. What shall I bring?" "Nothing useful. Consider it a test." His grin came back bright and entirely himself. "At last, a task for which I am uniquely qualified." Spring reached Brackenmere 6 months after the first turn of the account room key. The hills beyond the walled garden had gone green, and white blossom climbed around the lodge doorway. The winter had left a patched wall, 2 mismatched panes, and 1 ceiling stain, but the rain no longer owned the rooms. Constance's cottage had smoke from the chimney and rosemary beside the path. Another repaired cottage received a young couple and their infant on a clear Tuesday afternoon. Their cart stood in the yard while a table, 2 chairs, a cradle, and 3 badly tied bundles crossed the threshold. Verity supervised only until she realized the young mother had arranged the kitchen more sensibly than the carrier. Then she stopped supervising. The old lock, however, had swollen during winter and refused to turn cleanly. Fitzwilliam sat on the low step in shirt-sleeves, his dark navy coat folded beside him. Screwdriver beneath the latch plate. "This is not," he said, "the use which the peerage was designed to be put. The peerage appears to have survived. Barely. You are holding the screw crooked." He looked up at her. "You invited me here 6 months ago for my charm. I invited you to meet a slate merchant. A cruel rewriting of history. Straighten the screw." He did. When the new brass lock finally clicked, Fitzwilliam stood and stepped aside. Verity tested it herself. Smooth. She opened the door and handed the primary key to the young mother. "The kitchen chimney draws hard in an east wind," Verity said. "Keep the damper half closed when it does. Mrs. Cavendish knows where the extra kindling is kept, though she will make you listen to a complaint about my garden wall before she tells you." From the path next door came Constance's voice. "I heard that." The young mother laughed. Then she pressed a small bunch of early flowers into Verity's hand, primrose white violet, and a sprig of something Verity could not name. "For the house," the woman said. Verity looked at the flowers, then at the open cottage, where ordinary noise had already begun, a chair scraping stone, a baby protesting, the young husband asking where the kettle had gone. Not proof. Life. She walked back toward the lodge. At her doorway, white blossom brushed the stone above her head. Inside stood the flagged kitchen. The scarred table, and farther down the corridor, the account room that remained locked when she chose it to be. Fitzwilliam stayed on the gravel path. His dark navy coat stood out against Brackenmere's white blossom and spring green. There was no merchant beside him, no trustee behind him, no work list between them. "The lock is acceptable," Verity said. "High praise. You may recover. I am not certain I can." With the third cottage nearly finished, His Grace appears to have exhausted his usefulness at Brackenmere. Some would say that happened in September. Those people lack generosity. She smiled. He did not come closer. That, more than the 6 months of Sunday suppers, told her he understood the thing she had needed him to learn. A door was not an obstacle set for his amusement. It was a choice on the part of the person inside. Verity shifted the flowers to one hand. Her fingers found the duplicate iron key in the pocket of her ivory day gown. For one beat, she left it there. A key was practical. It saved a walk to the front door in bad weather. It also meant that someone else might arrive, when she had not planned for him, might possess a way into the home she had fought to keep entirely under her own authority. 6 months earlier, she would have solved that uncertainty by keeping every key herself. Fitzwilliam remained on the gravel. He did not smile her toward an answer. He did not hold out his hand. He simply waited where the path ended, as if a duke could be kept outside forever, and the world would survive it. The difference was not that Verity had ceased to value control. It was that the control was hers. She could give access. She could withdraw it. And the man before her had spent 6 months proving that if she closed a door, he would understand the sound of the latch. Her pulse gave one hard, inconvenient beat. Then she took out this key. She held it out. "This opens the side door," she said. "The account room still requires manners." For once he had no immediate answer. He stepped close enough to take the key and no closer. The iron settled into his hand. "And today?" he asked. Verity looked past him to the repaired cottages, the dry path, the garden waking around walls that had been expected to defeat her. Then she stepped back from the threshold. Fitzwilliam crossed the gravel only after she had made room. He came inside carrying nothing useful at all. The end.